Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming today. Let's wait a couple of seconds for people to get in and we'll begin. Okay, I think we're ready to start. Hi, everybody. My name's Melissa Cerrone, and I'll be presenting this introductory slideshow for the Creative Youth Workforce Grants program offered by the City of Sacramento's Office of Arts and Culture. I'm the program manager, and I'm here with my colleague, Diana Rufner, to give you a brief overview of the Creative Youth Workforce Training Grant. It's two categories of funding and how you can apply to the one that's most appropriate to you. I'm going to begin with an overview of the pilot grant first, because it's really the application that I think is going to apply to most folks. Remember that everything that I say about the pilot grants will also apply to the program grants, but then there are several additional steps for eligibility for that application. And as always, I'm going to save time for questions at the end of the presentation. And then we'll ask that you put your questions in the Q&A, or if you'd like to ask a question, just hit the raise hand button and we'll unmute you and you can ask the question. But before I begin, I'm going to state my very first piece of advice. And if you've attended any of these grant webinars in the past, this advice should be familiar to you. And that is read the entire guidelines before even opening up the application. We found that the number one reason that applications are not successful is that applicants didn't read the guidelines thoroughly. Either they didn't read the eligibility requirements carefully or they didn't follow the rubric. The guidelines are designed to help you understand everything that the review panel is going to be looking for. And that's why we ask that when you do your application, there's a little checkbox, and we're going to ask that you certify that you have read the guidelines even before going into the application. So, oops. Sorry about that. Next, we're going to do our agenda. I'm going to be going through what the program is about and what its goals are. I'll tell you about the two different categories of grant funding and how they're each different. We'll talk about expectations and review the 4 different levels of training you may provide. Then I'm going to spend a little time on each of the 4 pathways, what they are and what specifically makes up each pathway. We'll talk about the target youth populations for this program, and I'll discuss eligibility. What makes you eligible to receive grant funds, not only from the city, but also what makes you eligible for these programs. We'll go over the rubric for funding. And once we've reviewed all the basics for each grant, I'll tell you a little bit more about what would qualify you to apply for a program grant and the extra elements that we're going to be looking for in this grant. And then we'll take questions, and finally we'll go into the application form so you can see what it looks like, and we'll navigate around that. So remember, even after the presentation, I really encourage you all to reach out with questions or to ask for clarifications. We want everybody who chooses to apply to understand the application and what we're looking for in the proposals. And most of all, we're looking for programs that really best serve our goals for this program. So what is the Creative Youth Workforce Grant Program? These are grants for businesses or nonprofit organizations to provide youth workforce readiness training, apprenticeships, or pre-apprenticeship opportunities. Also skill development, placement services, and/or coaching and mentoring in the creative economy. There are 2 different and distinct categories of grants that we're offering. One, which are the workforce pilot grants, and those are $75,000 each, to be awarded to applicants that have done some level of youth workforce training, but want to pilot maybe a more structured youth workforce program and try some innovative approaches. And we plan to offer up to 7 grants in this category. And then we have the workforce program grants, and they'll be $220,000 each, awarded to organizations who already have a strong training program in place, but maybe want to scale the program and have a plan to sustain it after the grant funds are spent. There are going to be very few program grants awarded, probably no more than 3. So this category is going to be very competitive, and the bar for eligibility is going to be much higher. So as you see, only 10 grants total for youth workforce. So, we really want you to look at it carefully and make sure that you're applying in the best category for you. Okay, so we're going to go over some of the specifics first to the pilot grants. And remember, as I said, everything that applies to the pilot grant program will also apply and be elements of the program grants. So we're just going to add on for the program grants. So the objectives of this program is to serve a number of goals for the Office of Arts and Culture. One of which is we really want to invest in high quality programs. We want to support what's working. We want to invest in organizations with expertise, industry connections, and student placement rates in industries that are high potential in the creative economy fields. This program is really closely aligned with our creative industry goals and our support for creative businesses. We want to invest in the broader community of those who are exposing youth to these creative employment opportunities. Our office has recently made significant investments already in traditional arts and arts education nonprofit providers, and now we want to ensure that we're also investing in a broader economy that focuses on employment opportunities for young people. And we want to help foster productive work for youth that can lead to future employment in creative fields. So internships and apprenticeship programs can be a gateway for rewarding careers. And we hope that with this support, those opportunities can begin to increase. I want to take a minute to review the types of training we're looking for as part of this grant. We are looking for something that's more structured than a workshop series or some classroom training module, and this includes varying levels of structure. All of them are eligible for applications, but they're all a little bit different. So I just want to go through some of the definitions of them as we're looking at them. These all come from, online sources. You may identify your program slightly differently, but use this as a guideline for how we're looking at them. So obviously, first are internships. They're experiential learning, integrating knowledge and theory learned in the classroom with practical application and skill development in a workplace setting. Internships should provide students the opportunity to gain valuable applied experience, develop social capital, explore career fields, and make connections. Pre-apprenticeships are programs or sets of strategies designed to prepare individuals for entry into a registered apprenticeship program or some other job opportunity. So it's not as highly structured as an apprenticeship, but it's really more structured than perhaps an internship. Apprenticeships are really long-term training programs, usually 1 year or more, in which you can learn the skills of a trade while receiving compensation. Companies may offer apprenticeships to help candidates develop the practical abilities to perform skilled jobs. During an apprenticeship, you typically work under the guidance of one or more experienced, qualified employer. After completing the apprenticeship, you often earn a certification or some kind of license in the field that you're in. And we also are going to be opening up to other training. So if you don't fit in any of these categories, you can offer other training, which should be organized and structured, designed to develop or enhance the knowledge, skills, and competencies in a specific area. And we want to know that if you choose this category, we're going to ask you to be very specific and tell us why you think your program not only qualifies for this funding as a training program, but it's going to be also competitive in this field of applicants. Last year, the Office of Arts and Culture commissioned a study on the Sacramento's growing creative economy, what it is and what it could be, the economic trends, challenges, and opportunities, and the current assets. And this study is called Sprout to Growth, and it is the foundational document that we're using to determine which pathways we're going to develop with this grant program. This doesn't mean that these are the only creative pathways or even the only ones that we would support. But in an effort to provide our youth with workforce experience in areas that we see the city growing in as a whole, we wanted to closely mirror areas where potential investment exists. You can find a link to this study on the Creative Youth Workforce page of our website, and I really highly recommend everybody takes a look at this before they apply. You certainly don't need to read this. It's a very long study. You don't need to read the entire study, but there is a section on the 4 pathways, and it will help you determine where you fit within any of these pathways and if you're a good match for this program. Also know that in this study, very specific businesses are called out because the organization Creative Startups that we commissioned the study, and they did the study for us, they did a lot of interviews in the field. So they're going to mention very specific organizations. But please know these are not the only organizations in these pathways. They just happen to be organizations that they called out who are doing this work. You may be or you may not be one of the organizations called out, but know that that's not a prerequisite of being part of this program. This is just some examples that might be helpful for you. Okay, so for the purpose of the grant, we're going to focus on 4 pathways. And these are media production, which includes traditional, digital, and experiential media, film and video content, video games, extended reality, and music production. Also design, so it could be micro-customized design, fashion, interior, sustainable, and industrial design. Experience creation, which is creativity in the fields of hospitality, event technology, and music festivals. And the 4th pathway is civic innovation, and that's really innovation in civic life. It would include architecture, public service infrastructure, planning, health technology, and educational technology. Now, I know some of you are going to review the pathways and you're going to see things like the culinary arts are included. I believe the cannabis industry is included in this study. They're all referenced, but for the purpose of this grant, those won't be pathways that we're going to be funding. There are other city departments that provide support in these areas. And we want to be mindful of how we can focus on a sector of the creative economy workforce that is not as well funded by the city. So we'll ask to see how your business or organization falls in one of these 4 categories. So again, when you get into the application, you're going to check one of these categories. So that's why I would encourage you to go and look at the study before you do that. If you're still unsure as how you might fit in these pathways and you want to see some examples of each, go to the study and read up on them. Professional jobs in these fields would include video production, fashion design, visual effects, animation, AR, VR, and immersive experiences, game design, web and UX design, sound, music, and new media production, and event technology. And obviously, if you're still unsure as to whether your industry meets the eligibility standards, contact us and we can discuss it offline. Okay, so I talked a lot about what fields are good candidates for this work, but we haven't yet talked about who the program targets. We're specifically targeting youth and young adults ages 16 to 24 who are residents of Sacramento. You don't need to span all of the ages in your program if it's not appropriate to you. So if you focus on perhaps high school students and somebody else is focused on post-high school students or young adults, both would be equally eligible. You would just tell us a little bit about who your target population is and why. Priority should be given to youth who may have had difficulty finding internships or apprenticeships in the creative fields. Maybe they lack access to out-of-school programs. Programs might be expensive and have tuition involved that they can't afford. So there may be barriers for them to participate in them. They should reside in low or moderate income households and reside within or adjacent to a qualified census tract. Does that mean that every individual you train must meet every category? No, not necessarily, but we do expect that most of your participants will fall into at least 2 of these categories. And we're going to really look carefully at how you're recruiting your participants. And remember that there is an expectation that every participant in your program will be paid for their time with you. Okay, so pay close attention to this section because it's going to give you a better sense of whether this program really is for you. In order to be considered eligible, not only does your business need to be in Sacramento, but your training facility must also be in Sacramento. You've got to qualify either as a nonprofit organization or a registered business. So this grant is not for individual artists or collectives or even fiscally sponsored groups. You have to have been in existence for at least 1 full year and have a financial statement to prove it. You have to have some professional staff who are paid, and they should be staff that are experienced in training or mentoring young adults or youth. You'll also need to meet some city and federal requirements, such as being a registered supplier with the city and being in good standing with the California Secretary of State. And if you're a nonprofit, also with the Department of Justice. And finally, one last requirement is you may not have received a program or a project grant from the Office of Arts and Culture of more than $75,000 in the years 2023 and 2024. So again, a project or program grant that would exceed that amount during that period. So that would include anybody who received direct funding from the Creative Corps program. With the City of Sacramento, you would not be eligible for this funding. If you've gotten CAA, which is the Cultural Arts Award, or ARPA funding, those are general operating support grants, and that would not make you ineligible. Those amounts don't count, so you could still apply. All right, what you must provide. We're asking all programs to include the following elements. You're going to need a recruitment plan. If you already run an internship program or some other training program, it's not enough to say that you'll continue to provide internships to those who are already attending. This grant specifically asks you to market this program and recruit new youth who have not had access to your program. We also want to ensure that it is training, not just a work program. So, for example, a paid job moving equipment, just moving equipment for a video company would not qualify as a training program. There must be an element of learning involved in a structured environment with qualified trainers. You can offer internships or employment if they're part of a training program in your industry. You must pay at least $16 per hour, and we will verify payments from everyone who is awarded a grant. And we do ask that employment averages at least 15 hours a week, and that doesn't need to be all during the school year. We know that maybe some students during, school year can't work 15 hours a week, but if you can extend their hours into the summer and they could maybe work longer, it could average out to about 15 hours a week. And we are going to be asking for quarterly reports from you. If you receive these funds, you'll get a template and you're going to need to continue to report out on how you're using the funds. So next, I want to spend a little time going over our funding rubric. So if you're new to our grant program, we do use a tool called a funding rubric to help determine how grants are awarded. Our staff doesn't select who will be funded. We leave that work to an independent panel made up of community and field experts. The staff only reviews applications for completeness and eligibility, and then we turn all applications over to the panel to read and score. To help a panel decide, we use something called a rubric that corresponds to the questions in your application and the points that you'll receive for the different components. They will determine whether your responses minimally meet expectations, satisfactorily meet expectations, or exceed expectations. And there is a point range for each one of those 3 categories, and that's how you will be scored on your application. So in this way, a panelist can score specifically on what they see in an application. So panelists aren't scoring you on your reputation or what they've heard about you in the field or what they know by working with you in the past or anything like that. They're really looking at how you answer the questions in the application. And they're going to be ranked high to low, and the panelists will then recommend who should be funded. So that's really why I recommend spending a lot of time looking at the rubric before you apply. So there are different sections to the rubric. Let me go through each one quickly. First section is organizational capacity. So we want to know how well you are positioned to successfully carry out a program like this. Do you have qualified staff to administer the work and do the training? Can you show us that your resources are well managed? Can you provide a detailed plan on how you will market this work to the priority audience and assure us that you have access to youth in the qualified neighborhoods? So those are some questions around organizational capacity you'll be asked. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility section. Is your program one that will be supportive for youth who identify as BIPOC or LGBTQIA+? Do you employ staff and trainers who look like the participants in the program or have similar identities to them? What is your experience working with youth in low-income neighborhoods? Is your facility set up and are your trainers able to support youth with disabilities? We're going to ask you to tell us how. The third section is program impact. Can you provide a training plan that shows a pathway to workforce readiness or at least outlines the steps to get there? Is your approach innovative? Are you trying a new form of training that will help you reach your goals? And do you personally have the capacity to sustain employment or a training program after the period of the grant? If not, are you providing introductions to the workforce for your trainees? And finally, the last section would be industry expertise. What's the technical or artistic level of your work? What's your place in the industry? Is your educational value recognized as being high? Do you produce products or events that showcase your reputation in Sacramento and beyond the city? So we're going to be asking questions and also asking for work samples, which will show us what your work is like. Okay, so those are the criteria we're looking for in our pilot grants. Again, remember, we're looking for folks who either want to ramp up their existing training or add some kind of more formal workforce training element to their existing training programs. Now, for the program grants, we're looking for a few organizations who already demonstrate most of those qualities and want to take their training to a new level. If you choose to apply in this category, you're going to be applying with a separate application, and that application is going to have additional qualifications for eligibility. So I ask you to review them really carefully. You're going to be asked to make a data-supported case that your industry is a high-potential creative industry. So this is an example of ways that you can use information from either Sprout to Growth or any other recent data that you can cite about your field and why it's a high growth field. You'll have to have a minimum of 2-year history of training youth or young adults. We're going to ask for evidence that your leadership is strong and is recognized by colleagues or former students who are working in your industry. We're going to want to see that you're currently providing high-level training or internships. We'll ask for a detailed plan for scaling or continuing after the grant. And then we'll ask for evidence that your program meets industry standards for training. So if there's any kind of certification involved, you're going to be asked to show that. And an important addition to this program for workforce readiness is providing wraparound services. And these are services that really are adjacent to the industry training you'll provide, but are really important in supporting youth in their job readiness. They can include intake and needs assessment. We know that all youth are not the same, and they're going to have different needs and different levels of experience when they're entering any training program. You may provide weekly coaching or check-ins to discuss areas of improvement or strength, or just to see how things are going. You may provide transportation support, for example, a stipend for public transportation if it's needed, work documentation support, and job readiness prep that could include workplace etiquette or professional attire consultations. Not everything is suited to every business, but we want to know that you've thought about it and you have a plan to help each participant be successful. And finally, there is an additional rubric category for these grants. So the rubric that I just went over with you, all of that will be included in this application. And then there's one additional section that's going to ask some more detailed questions. You're going to be asked, obviously, about your wraparound services here. You'll need to provide data on your industry. You're going to be asked for bios of your professional staff, showing their skills, their affiliation, and we'll also ask for letters of support from the field, who you've worked with, who you know in the industry that can, speak to your training, even letters from past students or folks who've gone on to get rewarding careers in the field. You're going to be asked about the program you currently run, as well as a sample from your curriculum. So we're really actually going to ask you to provide a little bit of your curriculum in the application. And obviously also a plan on how you'll scale the program after the grant period. So that is the program grant. Okay, I like to include a slide on payment disbursement, even though it doesn't apply until your grant is recommended for funding and you go to contract with the city. But I think it is important to include because it might affect who wants to apply for a grant and who doesn't. I think a lot of folks think that once you receive a grant, and maybe it happens with other entities who fund, that if you receive a grant and you receive a $220,000 grant, that the city will just send you a check for $220,000 as soon as your contract's done. But that's not how grants work at the city. We will pay you the first 50% when the contract is fully executed, which means that it's signed by all parties. Then, once you can show proof that you've done your reporting and you've already spent the initial funds, so you've spent the initial 50% on eligible costs from your budget, you'll then get the next 40%. Your last 10% is a reimbursement for all of the funds. So you'll get the last 10% when you can show us that you have spent everything that is in the grant. So it becomes a little bit difficult for some organizations at the end, but there are ways that you can structure your budget to make it less onerous on you at the very end of the grant for that last 10%. And obviously you also have to give us all your final reports. No final checks can go out until all the reporting is in order. So I want to end with a timeline so you're aware of the deadlines for the program. The guidelines were published on November 20th, and they're up on the website with the application. We're doing the information session today, obviously, December 5th, and we're going to take general questions from everybody until December 12th. And then when we get those questions and we answer them all individually, we'll take all these answers and we'll put an FAQ up on our website so that everybody can take advantage. You may not think of something and somebody else may have a really great question, and they will be able to provide it for you so that you can see what it is. What you don't see here on this deadline is that I've added a 2-hour office hour session at City Hall. And that's going to be on Wednesday, December 18th from 1 to 3 p.m. And it's just a really informal opportunity for you to drop in, ask questions if you're having some concern about a particular rubric piece or an application question. You can just come in and we'll assign people just, short periods of time that they can ask questions and just sort of sit around and either learn from others or just have one-on-one time with the grant staff so that you can help you a little bit with your grant. The deadline to submit is January 10th at 11:59 p.m. Please don't wait until midnight because it will be closed on midnight. It really does close at 11:59 and you cannot get into the grant application after that. We usually, try to continue to answer questions up till about 4 or 5 o'clock on the day of the deadline. I really encourage you, don't wait till the last minute. And if you have a problem or you have some kind of issue at 7 p.m. at night, there's really not going to be anybody that's going to be able to help you. So I always say to people, don't wait on this if you can help it. If you want to apply and you know that you're eligible, start it now. Chip away at this application. You don't have to do it all at once. You can do a little at a time, and you're going to be much less stressed out about it. And I do know holidays are crammed into the middle of this application, but that's why we opened it early and we're closing it in January. So giving people a little bit of extra time to be able to get to do that. So there should be no reason for people not to be able to do it. The grant agreements will probably be ready, given that you have everything that's necessary to complete the grant agreements in March of 2025. It does take us a while to go through the review period. Panelists have to read, and then we have to set up a public review, and there is a process that it has to go through. It usually has to go through the Arts Commission for approval. So it takes a little bit of time, but by March we should be ready to go into grant agreements. If you're applying for and receive a pilot grant, that's about a 12-month grant period, and we allow 18 months. You don't have to take the entire 18 months, but 18 months are allotted for the program grants. So I know that's a lot. I am going to stop. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if we have any questions here. What I do want to say is that if anybody has any specific questions, I didn't mean to not share the screen. If anybody has any specific questions about eligibility, I would hope that we could maybe not spend a lot of time talking about whether each of you is eligible for the program based on your work. I'm really happy if you drop me an email. I think Diana's going to put in the chat the email address for our grants, and we could talk offline. I could even set up a short phone conversation, but I'd rather answer some general questions if possible. So I'm going to look at this. Okay, the first question, the guidelines mentioned participants must earn at least $16 an hour and must be employed for at least 15 hours a week. However, the exact duration over which these hours must be averaged is not explicitly, no, it's not explicitly stated. There really isn't an expected number of weeks for the requirement. I really want organizations to tell us what they think is appropriate for this work. We are going to leave that up to you to determine how many hours. Obviously we're saying a certain number of hours because there are expectations for the program that you're going to do something which is really going to be workforce ready or workforce prepared for young people. So we're not looking at something that lasts, a few weeks. It's obviously a longer term program. There's an expectation for more youth to be trained. Obviously with the program grant, there's a minimum number for both the pilot and program grant. I believe it's at least 5 in the pilot grant and at least 12 in the program grant. It is in the guidelines, so in case I'm off on that, that's where we are. The second question's for organizations applying for the $220,000 program. How detailed should the plan be for scaling the work beyond the grant period? Should we include potential funding sources, or is the focus more on program design and sustainability? I think the more detailed you can be, as I said, it's going to be very competitive. We're talking about only 3 grants at the most. If we don't get enough qualified applicants, we have the option not to award 3 grants in that category. So we're really going to be looking hard at these, our panel will be looking really hard at these programs, and they really want to see some evidence of how you're going to continue the program. So obviously program design is really important. Sustainability is really important. But if you have no plan for where the money is going to come from, that might be an issue. Can funds be used to buy and rent equipment and spaces? There is a budget, and we'll be showing you the grant application. So there's really very specific criteria in the budget where you can spend the money. Buying equipment, it has to be something that's very specific to the needs of the trainees, which means you may need, some kind of new printer that would be really fantastic for your business. But if you're not buying it specifically for the youth workforce program, it may not be considered eligible. So you'll see when we look at the application, a lot of it's really about personnel and what you're able to do in the training. Not how to okay, ask a question on audio, but would like to be, I think you just need to, Tommy, you just need to raise your hand and we can unmute you. For tax purposes, the grant is awarded. Is the money awarded tax, or does the organization have to claim it? I can't give you that advice. You would really need to talk to a professional tax advisor. Again, remember, this is money, obviously, that's going to nonprofit organizations or businesses. And, yeah. So do I see, Dana, is there anybody that we need to unmute? Do you see any hands raised?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Sure.
Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry, it took me a moment there. So sort of a general question, I wouldn't expect for you to answer, as you just indicated, questions on eligibility, and that's okay. What I'm trying to understand is, having been involved in the creative community for quite some time, I think we all understand that it's sometimes difficult to get to specific preparations for jobs that may or may not always exist in that arena. And so it doesn't sound like you're trying to support employment programs, but you are trying to support programs that prepare young people for potential employment. Here's what I'm getting at. We have a program, it's called our Multimedia Network. We are training at-risk kids in areas related to digital marketing, graphic arts, short films, and so forth and so on. The idea is generally this: we want to impart to young people the focus and discipline that goes with the idea of being able to complete a project, which are the kinds of skills that we think can translate not just to the creative community, but to any potential employment. And I think that's a very valuable service. We've had kids working on film projects and so forth and so on, but they might not all become filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
So we can demonstrate through our curriculum, we can demonstrate through our past academies over the past couple of years. We can demonstrate that we've actually had our kids involved as production assistants on films. Our nonprofit has been a production co-partner. We're doing all the real things, but what I'm concerned about is to apply for a grant where we cannot point to a specific path where everyone in this program is going to get a job. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I think what you're going to want to do, I hear what you're saying, and obviously, when you're trying to do sort of a youth workforce program, and this is not even specific just to the creative economy, does every internship, does every workforce program develop into a specific pathway career for every youth? Not necessarily, but what I believe I hear you saying is that they're developing useful skills that are going to support them as they move into the workforce when they're ready. And again, we're talking about, I mean, in some cases, we're talking about 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. So we know that they're not necessarily ready for that workplace, but this is a step along the path. And I think, again, only because we have so few grants to award, we're going to just ask you to be as specific as you possibly can be. So to say the kinds of things you just said to me, that's what I would expect to see in your application. Like where do we take these youth when they start with us to where they end up? How are they different from their experiences with us?
That's very, very fair. I just wanted to know wanted you to know that we can't assure that everyone associated with this program from 16 to 24 is going to get a job, because not all high school kids are going to get a job. Okay.
Exactly,
No,
exactly.
you answered my question. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
All right.
I wanted
You're
to be realistic.
Great. This is the business would most likely expense most of the grant. Only wages are taxed by the person they're being paid to. I don't know the question. I think you're asking is these are paid wages that should be taxed. If it's an employment opportunity, again, I would talk to whoever is your business specialized. I would imagine that most things need to be taxed, but I can't answer specifically for every scenario. So again, I would that's not part of our responsibility. That's part of your responsibility if you receive the grant. But if the taxes are part of the wages, so you can add benefits or whatever it might be that you take out of, that you pay into wages, that can be part of your expense. I don't know if that's helpful. Okay. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Do I see another question? Oh, how can we review the recorded session? Thanks for asking that. It takes us usually about a day to get that up online. So tomorrow's Friday. It might be difficult by certainly by Monday. It's on our YouTube channel, and I think Diana maybe can put it in the chat, the information. And if you want to spend a little bit more time, we can open the application here, and I'll just walk you through it quickly. We'll open one of the applications. Again, remember there are two, so depending on which one you're going to apply for, make sure you're opening the right application. Okay, so this is the first thing you're going to see when you get into Submittable, and there are instructions on how to set up your account in Submittables. So there's the Creative Youth Workforce Pilot and Program Grant. So we're just going to open the pilot grant because they'll be very similar. Here's all your background and information. Again, just remember where it says link to the full guidelines, you are going to need those full guidelines. Don't try to get by just on the application alone. And the very first thing is they're going to ask you to check a bunch of boxes that you've read the application guidelines. As I said, we do have a request that no grant request should exceed 50% of your annual budget. And we're going to ask you for financial statements only just because it becomes too much of a too large of a part of your budget. So we want to make sure that it's an appropriate amount that we're funding. So that might also affect how much you choose to request. Obviously, you have to confirm that you're in the city of Sacramento. This grant is only offered to city of Sacramento, and you have to be in a qualified zip code that says you're in the city, unfortunately not in the unincorporated area. And there's a Find My District link for you. We want to make sure that you're in good standing with the Secretary of State if you're a business, and also with the Department of Justice if you're not. These are really city requirements. The city won't do business with anybody if they haven't demonstrated that, and the city will check before they go to contract. And as we said, you haven't received a program or project grant from the city's Office of Arts and Culture in the last couple of years. Okay. If you checked all these boxes and you made it through that, then you get right to the application. And it's going to ask you all the general questions, your name. It's going to ask you your organization type. I think we've added every single type that there is. If you are an other, you can check that, but somewhere in the application, you're going to have to tell us what that is. And obviously your primary artist name, leader name, and all your contact information. And you may have a different person filling out your grant application. We'd like to know all of their information in case we have to get in touch with them. That's really helpful. there's a little box for you to check saying you don't want to be added to the newsletter. We do add everybody who applies automatically to our newsletter, but you can opt out. We'll need your ID number, your tax ID, when your business was established. We'll ask for a signed W-9 form, and then your address where the business is located. So that's super important, and your mailing address. So all easy, hopefully. And then we ask for screenshots to show that you're registered with the Secretary of State. I do believe if you're a sole proprietor, that's not necessary. I think that's the only category where that wouldn't be necessary. Website, social. We're going to ask for the primary purpose or mission of your organization. You'll see it has a pretty small word limit for that. So really tell us just who you are and what you do. We're going to ask for a number of employers, number of contracted workers. So again, you may have all contracted workers, or you may have all regular W-2 employees. We're just asking to find out like what the size of your staff is. And we're going to ask about your income and for you to upload a financial statement. If you have any questions about the financial statement, reach out and we can help you with that. Obviously, now we're into the real proposal. So you're going to pick a pathway. You have to pick one of the four. We're going to ask the kind of training that you provide. And then a little bit more about your business. Tell us who you are and what you do, and so that a panel understands who you are. I always like to say that assume your panel has never heard of you ever before. That's not to say that there might be panelists who do know of you, but we often use panelists who don't live in Sacramento and they may not be familiar with your work. So this is a great opportunity for you to tell people who you are and all the great work you do. There's an opportunity to talk about what you're offering, your creative workforce program, what's unique to you, how many people, how long you want it to last. Again, this is really about what you want to do. We don't want to, once you're eligible, we don't want to like put you in a box and say you must do it this way. I mean, you are the experts in the field, so we want to hear what you want to do. How many individuals will be trained and employed during the grant period? Be very realistic. We told you what the minimum is, but don't feel like you have to say, oh, we're going to train 100 people. If you're not going to train 100 people, that's not good. And then a program description. These questions are pretty self-explanatory, so I won't go into too many details, but really asking you to talk about what you're going to be doing. And now see, we're getting into questions that are really specific to the rubric, the organizational capacity. We do ask that everybody upload biographies of, the key people who will be running the program or doing the training. We only ask for up to 2 pages, so just short bullet point biographies, or, something that would just give us a quick snapshot of who they are. Just basically where your income comes from. Are you, does it come from, if you're a nonprofit organization, does it come primarily from grant money or donations, or are you making money from the work that you do? And obviously your marketing plan. So that's all of the things that go along with the rubric for organizational capacity. And then we have the DEIA questions. And I won't go into those too deeply. Oops. They're pretty much what we ask, what's your experience working in these communities that we talk about? Then your program impact, again, an opportunity for you to talk about what impact you have. And finally, your industry expertise. And here's where we're going to ask you to upload work samples, just anything that really gives us a sense. You can upload images. You can do a short video if that's appropriate. If you want to do a little PowerPoint or Canva or something, slide material sometimes works well. And curriculum material if you want to provide it and if it's appropriate. And you can provide links if you're doing a video, so that's helpful there. Just be sure anybody providing any kind of video links, that's why we like YouTube, because it's pretty publicly available. But if you use something else, just make sure that it's not passworded at all. We can't take that. And then we go into your budget. And I think there's a description for everything in the budget, but really what we want you to do is in that second column where it says grant funds, everything should add up, where it goes down to the total should add up to the amount of grant that you're asking for. So I don't want to see anything in column B under total that isn't $75,000 in for this grant, which would mean everything that you're putting in those categories should add up to that. Maybe this program is much more expensive than $75,000, and you can certainly put any match that you might have. And you don't have to put money in every single category. Put it in the categories that you feel like are going to work best for you. But where we have the budget narrative, that's where you really need to explain to us what's in these categories. So if you're putting all $75,000 into salary and benefits for the program administration, I want to at least see somewhere in the cash match that you have salaries and benefits for the participants, because we did say they need to be paid. So if I'm giving you the entire grant and you're spending it all on your salaries, I want to know, is there another source of money for the participants' salaries? Likewise for marketing, what are we talking about in your marketing? Contracted services, do you really need to go out if you're providing wraparound services, for example? Do you need to contract with somebody who's really good at that and you have to pay them a fee? There is a category for materials and supplies, but again, we're going to really ask you specifically what they are, and they really must be related to your training program and anything else. But again, the more detail in your budget narrative, the better this is going to be for your application. And that's it. You can work on it as you go, but we always say save the draft. If you're doing a lot of writing, I always recommend maybe doing it offline in case anything happens with the program. It's great if you saved it in Word or some other program, so you could always cut and paste it back in and you haven't ever lost anything. It's not a glitchy, it's a pretty easy program, but accidents happen sometime, and we've all lost really great things that we've written and regret it. So you can just do a little piece of it and then save it and then come back to it. But once you press that submit button, you can't go back to it. So you can't work on the application once you press submit. So save that until you're really ready to go. If you've gotten it done early, take a look at it, read it carefully, ask somebody else to read it for you, go back and review it and make sure you said everything you want to say, and then feel free to submit. We really usually don't look at it until after the deadline. We might take a quick look just to make sure that everybody's attached what they're supposed to, but otherwise, just keep saving it, because once it's submitted, it's closed to you. Excuse me. So I think that's it. So unless anybody has any more questions, oops, is there another question? I understand that an organization can only be awarded one grant. However, I was wondering if anyone was asked that question. I was pretty sure it was going to be asked. Yes, you can certainly apply for both grants. Again, completely separate applications. Please, please, please treat them as separate. Because they may, your answers are going to be different depending on what program you're applying for. So it's not really just a cut and paste, and hopefully if I don't get one, I get the other one. But you would be eligible to apply for both. Most likely we'll review the program grants first. So if you were awarded a program grant, you would be taken out of the eligibility for the pilot grant. So just, just really think about it really carefully, what you want to apply for, and just make sure that you pay equal amount of attention to both grants if you really want to be going for both grants. We're going to be looking at a lot of things. We're definitely going to be looking at the scores, but we also want to see some diversity in the industries that are applying. So there may be opportunities, if somebody's applying in an industry that doesn't have a lot of grant awards in it, there's also an opportunity for them to be awarded a grant. But again, the scores still need to be at the top end So I think that might be everything. All right, will you be selecting the applicants with the highest regardless of pathways or age? Most likely, we're gonna be scoring, we're gonna be selecting applicants with the highest rubrics. But I am gonna say if we get, 10 applicants who are all in music production, I don't think it's really gonna serve, obviously we want to fund all these organizations. We want to fund you, but as our role in the city is to make sure that we're supporting the communities that we say we're going to be supporting. So it's really important for us to make sure that there are opportunities for everybody in different types of pathways. If there are youth who are interested in fashion design, we want to make sure if there's a great application in fashion design, that might be one that we want to support. So know that the highest rubric is going to be your best chance. Your highest score is going to be your best chance to be funded. But the panel can look at it and say they want to make a decision to fund a very high scoring organization that might be, very, very close to another organization, because it gives youth another opportunity to go down that road and try a different pathway. So I'm sorry, it's not an exact answer, but really just put your best foot forward in these applications, and I think it should be good. All right. Well, thanks everybody for attending. Again, if you want to either email us at Art Grants or come check out if you're in the middle of the application, you're feeling stuck, please come to the office hours. We'll put that up on our website just to remind everybody when they are and where they are. It's at City Hall in the first floor, in case you just have further questions, but happy to answer questions by email easily. So thanks everybody for coming, and have a good day.